So along the way so far, we've been looking at using var dump, as we've seen, to go ahead and inspect the contents of variables, not only giving us the value, but also the type as well. And we know that we can use this on arrays and a variety of other different data types. Now, it's really important that while you're learning PHP, and in fact, even when you're a seasoned developer, you pretty much find out exactly what's going on with your code. Now, the ability to dump out data makes it really easy to see what you're working with before you start doing things like looping or any of that. So while this is usually more useful for large, complex arrays and objects, we're going to basically cover the foundations again so you know exactly where to turn if you get stuck. And you know then that if you're struggling with something, you can use any of the methods that we're going to show here to go ahead and help you out. So first, let's just, again, go ahead and define out a variable. So let's make this an array because it's slightly more useful to be able to dump an array. And what we're going to do here is we're going to create an associative array by setting the key to Alex or any name rather than leave it at the default 0 upwards. So let's go ahead and create another one. Just keep this really simple like so. Okay, so if this were a complex array or this array was returned as part of a class or a function that we didn't build, how would we look at the contents of it? Well, we've already seen this. The best command to use probably is var dump. So let's go ahead and do this, check it out in the browser, and we see that this is an array, so that's really helpful. We know that we have 2 items in the array, and we see the contents of the array here, including the data types of anything in between. So now what happens if we had a slightly different structure to this? So let's say users, and let's go ahead and again output, say, in fact, we'll make this an array within an array. So name, let's go ahead and say Alex, and then again, let's say age, and set these as well, like so. Let's change this over to Billy, and let's change this over as well. So now we can do a var dump on users, and we know that we get a slightly different result. We still have 2 items, but now each of these items are numerically indexed, so starting at 0. We have an array within here, and then for the second key, which is 1, we have another array, and again, we can inspect the contents of each of these. So again, this example here, we know exactly what we're working with, so we don't really need to do a var dump on it. But again, if this was something returned from a database or part of another package, which you'll eventually learn about, then this will come in handy. Now, if you are following along and you see pretty much what I see here, then you're not going to be using a PHP extension called Xdebug. So there's a PHP extension called Xdebug, which makes it a lot easier, amongst other things, to see a nice output of what you dump. Now, what I'm going to do is switch over to another server I'm running that has Xdebug enabled, and you'll be able to see what this looks like. So we can bring back a basic array like this and do a var dump. Okay, so I've just switched over to a completely different server which has Xdebug enabled, and you'll probably agree that compared to me working locally on MAMP, you can see that this looks a lot better. I didn't have to do anything else. I'm using exactly the same code, but Xdebug has formatted this, it's given it a little bit of color, and it's structured it in a much nicer way. Now, if you want to install Xdebug, depending on your setup, there are plenty of guides around to do this, so I would recommend going ahead and trying to get that installed. However, it's not completely necessary, and if you don't want to, we have another option to make output a little bit prettier. So let's close this off, let's return back here, and I'll show you how to do this without having to install Xdebug. Okay, so we're doing a var dump at the moment, a normal var dump, which is giving us the following. Now, what we can do is go ahead and wrap this, and I think we've already looked at this in this series anyway, in something called pre-tags. Now, what this does is it preserves the formatting of whatever you are doing. So if we do this, and we come over to the browser, you can see here that we do get a nicer structure to this. All it's done is it preserved all of the line breaks that would have originally been output when using var dump. So you might also come across, and if you want to very quickly find out what you're working with, you may come across the print r function as well. So let's just go ahead and do print r on names, and let's go ahead and refresh, and that should be users. Let's give that a refresh, and you can see here that we get a slightly less complex output. Now, once again, we can do the same thing with this, so we can use the pre-tags here to go ahead and preserve the formatting. It really depends on what you want to do, but you can see that this is slightly easier to see what's going on, particularly for more complex things. If you didn't need to know information like this was an integer, this was a string, then this is a lot better for you. Okay, so for dumping, that is pretty much it. But once again, if you do struggle with anything and you're trying to work out what the value of something is or how an array is structured, just use var dump and you will be immediately able to see the state of a particular variable.